Shantes Kireño, Shantes Puros, Yawaname, Josya Yeng Shingera Desyo, Josya Yeng Shingera Desyo, Kuchahich buena ni ahí nada salin kun anji kurita nenga tinjas wakishu pakaksan wandashi ni nambe ano enga yash ukuri janga nitam kuringa in parak pinimbo ka isik shali tamingas kano engaks nani wanda piringoks weka na yeng pinin nambe oks weka no char kuri puna yeng mama nambe skaks sesi kora kuri pirin ano no noks memiri kurin como imakan sesi kora kwani uchar keri chan tatite chan ime chan engati noleta ano ka ime chan dishen gati ninsku kinzipiko uchar zipirpiti chan no ski yam dambe ses wera kiash ka uchar kwera pirin ano engati ninsku sesi pakaksu wa kiash hawaran zip ano ka interushti ku nyara kya insha tienen kuranga ka injuri que mientras no akpa yam dambe ses wera ano ses pikora rashing sen ka chef parandak shupa ka swaksan wandashi ni nambe mambarambe san inchik wandanya timpa menchik en anda pero tengin parakpin en noses manata anga huchar makashi chan ano ka ungsan mambarambe san miantan san eratsindan na ing sampiri para ka shwaksan ayengwan huchar kuripo chan ka marta ruchan imechan ka shuram kano eskan nanina suchani tamu kuringa kanina sucha unka chkia in ambe in nainak nalipirin como alipirin ambakindan ano irehtandan ka wani kunga skeri kurikim pamench kono me marapen kwal chikaks kanik no ses ni tam kurite ka mendrus wenan irehtandan ano imana meksa wanda sha washahtan na mendru yamle para shunsa sirekan sesi kimuchirnan kwerah pirena kita Siam también se suera que as 15 con sesik ucha un más kukulinda ucha más kachi chingonen ka xasi joaka ka un san wandashin eratsindan hulimanan ni manan ben marapen ko no ses ni ranka uchinande seksi wekshin kurachines kishiwek.
Yeah, with the permission of those who like have protected these lands and honoring the coastal Salish and Muckleshoot tribes that exist in these lands on which we're recording today. Overall, what my father did was go ahead and open the space, ready for this conversation, making sure that there is recognizing that there is other beings, other, higher power looking over us, and to make sure that the space is opened up properly for the dialogue that is about to be started. This conversation is going to be taking place with the Purhepecha community, an indigenous community that mostly resides in the northwestern region of Michoacan, Mexico, of what that territory is now known as and called as, and where we gather here from the communities that reside there today as displaced indigenous people, and introducing also as well that Ireta Purhepecha is the organization in which is hosting this space. Ireta Purhepecha is a community collective that is focused on the preservation of Purhepecha culture and identity, and has come together with the objective of strengthening our ancestral knowledge and traditions, and are committed to the reciprocal relationships with our native relatives of these lands, and as well as establishing solidarity with other non-dominant communities. And our hope is to establish a strong cultural base for future generations. As a response to COVID-19, Ireta Purhepecha has formed and organized itself towards a COVID-19 response framework, and noticing that it was very important to respond to the ongoing needs and issues that a lot of indigenous communities were facing and were not being able to access a lot of different resources in an equitable manner. also tying in the historical context and societal structures that exist that make it so that Indigenous communities are having ongoing facing inequities, and tying those things in with the work that we're doing. And it's important to note that although that we do come from Indigenous communities, that a really big part of our story and a part of the different challenges we face is due to the impacts of migration and our people being displaced from our home territory. And I think it's really important to understand those dynamics before the conversation takes place.
Netamente, pues cuando me enteré de que venía esta pandemia, sí me preocupé mucho, ¿verdad? Y se nos ocurrió de pronto hacer una despensa comunitaria. Nosotros decíamos, si de pronto mero esta situación nos deja sin trabajo, ya no podemos salir a las casas, por lo menos vamos a tener comida si hacemos una especie de trayendo de regreso aquello que nosotros llamamos harwa peracua, ¿no? Y hicimos despensa comunitaria por un tiempo más o menos prolongado. No era algo sostenible porque pues era nuestra casa, no tenemos dónde embodegar y dónde poner la comida, pero en el tiempo que estuvo funcionó y funcionó muy bien, ¿no? Después empezamos a abogar por los recursos que estaban anunciando en la radio, en la televisión, para que fueran más accesibles para la comunidad, ¿no? Eso más adelante voy a profundizar al respecto, ustedes me van a ayudar a profundizar de eso, ¿no? Y ahorita en la actualidad pues estamos tratando de ayudar en lo que podemos para concientizar a la comunidad, que se cuiden, que sigan los protocolos que se anuncian, ¿no? Por medio de las autoridades, también usando el sentido común, pero también trayendo algunos recursos, ¿no? Como por ejemplo ayudar a la comunidad para que se vacune con la campaña, facilitándolo para que nuestra comunidad también se pueda vacunar, informándoles de fuentes fidedignas acerca de la vacuna y esos temas que quizás en un momento más vamos a hablar.
Yo soy Vladimir Crisóstomo Luna y yo vengo de la comunidad indígena de Kichwa, Michoacán. Soy Purhepecha. Yo en la casa pues hablamos lo que es el Purhepecha, mi esposa y yo.
Sí, sí.
Y ahora pues también mis hijos, ¿verdad? Van aprendiendo poco, pero sí van aprendiendo también lo que es el puré, porque pues nos escuchan, ¿verdad? Que hablamos yo y mi esposa. Y también hablamos español, también pero esas son las dos lenguas que en la casa pues
sí,
que hablamos, ¿no? O sea, vivo allá por el área de White Center. Una vez que escuché yo la palabra, ¿verdad? Que había un virus, ¿verdad? Y que se llamaba COVID-19. La primera vez que lo escuché en en un levantamiento. Ya ve las costumbres que tenemos nosotros los purépechas, me invitaron a un levantamiento. Y ahí entre la gente, ¿verdad? Empezaron a hablar que según una persona aquí en el estado había salido positivo. Entonces, pues como una simple plática, yo no le tomé mucha atención. Pero después con el tiempo, como 2-3 semanas, me fui enterando más que pues esto se iba prolongando, ¿verdad? Que más personas se iban contagiando sobre el virus. Yo hice de mi parte, pues es mantener segura a mi familia, ¿verdad? Los hijos se quedaron en la casa, a tomar sus estudios en casa. Yo y mi señora pues igual nos encerramos. A veces cuando era medio así, de verdad muy necesario de ir a la tienda, pues solo yo iba. Yo iba a agarrar lo que tenía que agarrar y llegaba a la casa, desinfectaba las cosas, me quitaba la ropa que llevaba, me quitaba los zapatos. Todo traté de tener pues demasiado cuidado, ¿verdad? Porque sí, sí sabía, después yo supe y sí, después de haber tenido, yo digo que exageradamente de cuidado, porque sí las tuve. Las tuvimos en casa demasiado cuidado, pero al último pues nos enfermamos todos, nos contagiamos todos de COVID-19. Y fíjate que no fue algo muy, pues muy desagradable. En el momento no sabes ni qué hacer, a pesar porque yo venía, yo tenía extremo cuidado por la razón que yo soy asmático. Entonces escuchaba de los profesionales que los que padecemos de eso, del asma, ¿verdad? Somos más vulnerables al COVID-19. Entonces, ese era mi miedo, En el momento que yo supe que estaba yo, que salí positivo, pues sí, pues me dio muchísimo miedo. Y saber que todos mis hijos estaban con el COVID-19, incluso hasta mi nieto que tenía en ese momento 14 meses de edad. Y de ahí pues nos tuvimos que encerrar. Yo estuve en unas reuniones por Zoom de parte de profesionales, ¿verdad? Que nos ayudaban, que nos prepararon un poco de emocionalmente a no entrar en ansiedad, a no entrar en pánico. Y trataba yo de controlarme para no entrar en ese shock. Y igual ellos nos prepararon lo que íbamos a tener en casa, como bastantes, que digamos, sobres de paquetes de tecitos, ¿no? O medicamento. Incluso mucho antes, haz de cuenta que pues me estaba automedicando en casa. Y eso como que me ayudó bastante, porque en la casa yo fui el único que tuve menos síntomas. Y yo era el que más, pues yo estaba preocupado por mí. Entonces a mi esposa sí le pegó bastante fuerte. E incluso yo miraba, pues ya me daban ganas de pues llevarla al hospital, pero le decía, tranquila, va a pasar, vas a ver que va a pasar, ya mañana vas a amanecer bien. Le daba las medicinas, le preparaba los tés y eso. Y gracias a que a los 10 días ella salió, tuvo bastante mejoría.
Mi nombre es Minerva Javier Hurtado. Yo pertenezco a la comunidad de Tanaquillo, una comunidad purépecha. Yo soy purépecha. En mi casa hablamos el español. Les comento que lamentablemente en nuestra comunidad ya se perdió la lengua materna, que sería la lengua nata, pues del purépecha. Lamentablemente, porque me hubiera de haber gustado poder dominarlo y poder hablar el purépecha fluidamente. Ahora solamente puedo comprender algunas palabras y eso. Llevo viviendo aquí en el condado King alrededor de 20 años. Ahorita vivo aquí en la comunidad de Pacific, en la ciudad de Pacific, Washington. Tuvimos que estar encerrados en cuanto dijeron que necesitábamos seguir los protocolos. Mi familia y yo tratamos de seguir todos los protocolos que el Departamento de Salud Pública nos decía. Emocionalmente fue un poco triste porque tuvimos que dejar amigos, no reunirnos con los amigos. De hecho, Fátima, mi hija grande, tenía su graduación, se graduaba de high school, y debido a la pandemia, pues no pudieron celebrar normalmente como cada año se celebra lo que es las graduaciones de high school. Para ella sí fue como, en cierta forma, fue un poco triste porque, o sea, yo digo que ellos están con un anhelo de que voy a conseguir graduarme del high school y va a haber esto y me voy con mis amigos, bueno, y entonces todo eso no lo pudieron hacer. A pesar de todos los cuidados que tuvimos, como dice aquí el compañero, llegaba yo de la tienda, era dejar zapatos afuera de mi casa, quitarme toda la ropa, echarla a lavar. De hecho, yo llegaba directamente al baño a bañarme, porque no quería que nada entrara en mi casa, nada quería que entrara a mi casa. Desinfectaba todo, lavaba toda la fruta, todo desinfectaba antes de alzarlo. No dejaba que mis hijos tocaran nada que trajera de la tienda sin antes yo lavarlo y desinfectarlo. O sea, fue exageradamente los cuidados que tuvimos, y aún así no supimos ni de dónde nos llegó el COVID. En agosto del 2020, fue agosto, septiembre, sí, agosto del 2020 empezamos con síntomas de una gripe que yo eché la culpa, dije, ok, es el cambio de clima, cuando ya se empiezan a poner los días un poquito diferentes, y dije, ok, pues es porque ya está cambiando el clima, es parte de que pues nos va a agarrar una gripe, pero resulta que no era gripe. Mi esposo se empezó a sentir muy, muy mal y es raro que él con una gripe se sienta mal. Fui yo a trabajar porque a nosotros sí no nos pararon de trabajar. No nos pararon de trabajar porque nos consideraron como trabajadores esenciales. Nos tomamos el test de COVID. Estuve con una amiga 2 días antes, que le dije, ¿sabes qué? Está mi esposo enfermo, nomás quiero dejarte saber que estamos enfermos y que pues cualquier cosa puede pasar porque quiero que estés sobre aviso. Y me dijo, ok. Dijo, pero ya te hablaron. Le dije, no, no me han hablado. Dijo, dice, entonces yo creo que no, porque si hubieras estado, te hablan antes de las 24 horas, te hablan para decirte. Le dije, no, le dije, ya creo que acaban de pasar las 24 y no me han hablado. Dijo, entonces yo creo que no. Y acabando de colgar con ella, me hablan y me dicen que estábamos positivos. Y pues yo fui la que me puse más enferma. Emocionalmente, esta enfermedad te permite concientizarte, te permite apreciar tanto tu familia, te permite apreciar tanto tu salud, que yo decía, yo lo que quiero es sentirme bien. A veces quería comer, pero no podía comer, y yo le decía a mi esposo, en cuanto me sienta mejor, voy a ir y voy a comprar esto para comer. Y él me decía, nos animábamos uno al otro, decía, ¿cómo te sientes? Me decía, pues mal, ¿y tú? Pues también, uno tirado de cada lado, y los dos nos animábamos. Y mis hijos todos estábamos, pero nosotros estábamos más enfermos, y más yo.
Yo nomás tengo una teoría, ¿verdad?, de cómo llegó. Lo llevó mi yerno. En la compañía donde él trabaja, una persona ahí salió pues infectado, ¿no? Entonces la persona ni fue a hacerse el test ni nada, así se sentía medio mal según, y así fue a trabajar, y él ese día trabajó con esa persona. Entonces al llegar él el viernes en la casa, pues llega y abraza a su hijo y pues, la vida normal. Entonces resulta que el sábado tenía escalofrío, el domingo igual. Entonces luego yo pensé algo. Le dije a mi hija, vayan a hacerse la prueba. Y pues ella se negó. Y le dije, vayan a hacerse la prueba porque yo miro muy mal a tu esposo. Y por la tarde fueron. Pero ya yo el domingo en la tarde yo abracé a mi nieto. Pues entonces el virus yo pienso que pues ya lo tenían. Porque ellos fueron el domingo y yo agarré a mis hijos y nos fuimos a hacer la prueba el lunes. A primera hora nos atendieron como a las 9 de la mañana. Resulta que a nosotros nos hablan como alrededor de 3 horas, 9, 10, 11, como a mediodía nos hablan que según no había virus entre nosotros. Dice, no salieron negativos, no tienen el virus. Y pues sí me puse contento. Pero como en unas pocas horas, por ahí como alrededor de a la 1 de la tarde, le hablan a mi hija. Saben que ya no pueden salir, ustedes están positivos. Entonces yo desde ahí otra vez yo dije, no, aquí algo está pasando. Porque esa tarde mi niña empezó a sentirse mal con escalofrío. Al día siguiente mi hijo. Y al tercer día, pues mi esposa, y yo, al último, ya un miércoles, pues sí, ya empecé a sentir yo mal.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Loida Bautista Vargas y yo soy de Quinceo, Michoacán. Y la lengua que hablamos en mi casa, yo hablo pues así puro Purhepecha. con mis hijos, pero mis hijos hablan con sus hermanitos, hablan puro inglés en la casa, pero yo hablo Purhepecha. Y ya tengo aquí 20 años viviendo aquí. Escuchaba en el trabajo que las compañeras decían que venía una enfermedad, que nadie podía trabajar, que no iba a haber escasez de comida, pero yo no lo creía. No, y la compañera está no trabajar, no, que Estados Unidos está preparado para lo que venga. Perhini afectar y pensar y que en no anchulia que ambe may en renta, ampia chin como a mí me preocupaba. Niars María un 13 de febrero en Galinga que hasta anchulia último día en Garanchulia Galinga. Vengo ispicola rascano como escuchas que ay bueno chitira chitambia talinga no mengu is lengua pero what's chiti chenali no otro año kulia no mengu weras camberi trabajo al ambe ukulishkino como no mengu las pisquechas enfermedad ya no en otro agüera ngania ka tire cambe no tralania la Himamber con anchulis kachkanika puro easy en la casa, pero a mí me preocupaba, yo pensaba en una parte la enfermedad y otra cosa es pamer shimka pameliculiano, pero camenala shimcochque voy picola de tantos días de descanso que camen el primer día ni yo pensaba es que cuatar shimka. Es que cuatar en chis picola de empia. Y no llegó un día en Gamero Sandro, en otro aguantadip, que mero en otro ushangara ni trabajo al me daba escalofrío, mero chiranga, vengo mana culis ni ren, cajich que mana yengo compañera mayali mero en otro gua, que hi shush pamel culis, mero en otro gua shangarana. Que María Liwanda, cocachita esposo en chique, uchiti, jone que fue pindana, ka tam cheshim cuando apanyo chit familia en huri pinda hijo, chit esposo en huri pindana línea. Y yo me regresé en el vas. Hivasi hasta speka. Ma shani ma 15 minutos ya no us ni vas sin buhno gustando no spikolar ne. Himahti wanda chita ta kani chiti honal huri ho pindana. Que mariniran pindan que pero himero no se spikolar jim no tru shangara mero ka mero venga becharar piri mero pamera. Ka shumengi spikolar ni ngambe hichka shututuru chkola lik ya ngambe hala chape ngambe como limon chambe como chika sikungembe kuchix men chata kulika shoha kialisano hi mai hatin tata kuchidrele mamberus ka halin chika hiho no spikolar shinga kemalde mam tuchkar pamen chika halin chika hiho ndenge kulika no mami hui ko kapaki pana imas uchita tata kima werti pas tia tesur kulinchke pero yo ya sabía que me chindes que poca hia no me spikolar pismero Himat que alias pesha y oaxaco que wan sengar kamanga ka oaxaco que cubre boca bemeng bunoch kam pawoka matzazi con speka hipanga nika y matzalini uchak shaingo aquí resultado verna wera pawone y yo ya sabía himbo shimengo ni anda que cochimengo se jinja kulinda cuarto alemengo no otro expuerne kai al día siguiente como a las 7 de la mañana tune shamingas mensaje mayalin a ho mal halas kachkarende ni kamshin kovia primero inde no se sabe pamench tata marco mero no se sabe pamench inde himero no trushim shangara me no trushangara mero ka pamere mbo pensar is mero es ka hichko wali pringe hopere charara ni wali primero ka shuto anziri alia cintura al para abajo shuando como mengo no trus shangara ya hi is halas pues como chana shanala kano anden paralítico y chambe clinicalis nan kama no trushangatanga para mí pues era bien difícil porque Hisandro pensar y shimgalan chichkayas wale aquí wale aquí no otro era aquí a fuchit vevenchka o sea a mí me afectó mucho porque pues hitamo wera shimgalan jala fuchit hinengon hura kwaya ka no psicola de marco no sé psicola de mero al no hichka yas krusham berter kuske hichka pa otro eran de aquí yas no otro shabo kwats chiti chinel que matsne wam tachim de mamá estás bien kajala no chkaingo que skashano psicola shin hoy estoy bien ma no quieres comer huats ka kitire que india muktin que perchis que alania uno tiene hambre, pero tatamar no kushim tiren no podía ni comer. Un día ni ars tengan otro wim criesta ni ka. Hi siempre chkwam takwanya, watsuchiti chehigo wale que chita ta keri wanan kulnyani hotori rakcha ko watsuchiti chene por hishwan bertar kuske. Ay, orar cuchala cuchiti mingi encargar y a mí me afectó mucho demasiado porque Hyuchini, no sé, Hyuchini Sandro como tienda alisembeña ushingano y macuera tishti, we marishti, Huchites post como no canam kushipar. Y manan becuendin skuli joven, jale aquí mayalno, pero uno siempre waliti sam sandro como tire cambie pianta, limpiezan be, ochwati chambe cuidar y wan en smalan viejo. Ka hinch kari kor winga ma hektaris mero ano boshia samberia no us nianda sesenga hi isanch kuli wirian hamakia hindi winga ma hektaris como no ushin hiriesta sestero ya samberia.
Con mi análisis y mi reflexión sí tengo desconfianzas como todo mundo, ¿no? Sabemos que históricamente estos experimentos que han hecho sin consentimiento de nuestras comunidades, donde han usado comunidades no dominantes o comunidades más pobres para experimentar sus vacunas, sí surge ese temor y es comprensible, ¿no? Porque lo hicieron con la comunidad afrodescendiente o la comunidad negra, lo hicieron con los asiáticos, lo han hecho con los nativos como nosotros, ¿no? Pero a la par yo decía, si yo voy a hablar de cómo cuidarnos, y parte de cómo cuidarnos pues es la vacuna, ¿no? Pues tengo que ponérmela, si no, ¿cómo voy a estar hablando al respecto? Obviamente yo investigo, me informo, tengo muy buenos amigos que son virólogos, que estudian la cuestión de las bacterias, que estudian de los viruses, ¿no? Personas que aprecio mucho y con los cuales yo consultaba y les decía, y todos me decían lo mismo, mira Antonio, este virus o esta enfermedad que hay no es algo nuevo, ya estaba, nomás que no nos daba a nosotros los humanos, este virus mutó y ahora nos estamos enfermando nosotros. ¿De dónde vino? ¿Cómo vino? En 10 años, 15, 20, no lo sabemos, vamos a saber. Por el momento hay que cuidarnos. Sí es verdad, gente va a morir y si no nos vacunamos vamos a ser de las estadísticas de los muertos, ¿no?
Canes kahi enga ismal hapkiano hi puchit pensamiento hi luego le que nadie aguanta a nadie bucio yo le hablé a nadie para pedir ayuda pues dónde iba a conseguir la comida, qué me recomendaría yo dónde ir a recoger la comida. Ka nadie de alistia huche inspish casa despenso yo chimpirana. Ka para mí me chkarikani khalwas pindi ning jahta sa despensa me inskupke. Ka himi stu inzung sanano aplicari shoalini hoper huchachkania nohlens kiano para nani nenje mi ses chanala que man hayes ku ma winning litanzalan sandring ya inglés también boke. Ka hiya huchit kasia hino tuwe kshim kuchiti ho chashanaliana no hijo huchxno senda huchxno tratiak thire kambi ma shiri halo aline himboshi como no we que kuchiti ho chandu como aliana to winning litanzali nadi shim kerimeng je kemere lima per tuch khatsikuli ka gorma yandi ma beruni sam shiki hurake aline ka no igual ka halo anchkani ki me mana be winning litandane ko chiti ma difícil tanto ya no waksha inglés simboya kanofto unia sestuli shambe wandane himbo shinchang shinchke tata antonio ya flor sin wanda popki alina no ristan halo ata ayudan behdin ananix na hama nochki ni paishki yond kuli pishtia y no martit kufteka huchechka como wetalinchka sana ayudan be ya alinika kani halo kulis iman despensa ben jahtsanin skupkachke ka halo atan san hami siringanya indena ayudan be ya.
Sí, bueno, más que pues que no aguanta no ka llamar pen guardandas no como chanzen gonia ka kuchari kuchazin denzari como ireta Purhepecha no o chica kuchenga más kukulina que para sharaf para no chawandas pismar tarishia no solo changin kuchazin ya sino ham smart taris como kurangurin san indena haraf para kambe
Hiwanda pismatru ni mga yaling imtano San Vicente de Paula lingting ya inzungas número ma kahiwanda piñeka imachkari shangalis ya deja tu número y tu nombre me regresa al sistema de
Okay. In the último mes linka imanenga ya shamkini arwapin en iniciaron tangolinga que manda kuti insprang kaminachi saniman ushin ma marwashin no marwashin nas pikora shime ni mechun
ima courses wen halat mero ima kanika ayude timen jahtsin kayengo pkeni ni alin ima hitidiski ma ses porque ya ima hima nona ni insparanga shivanko de comida alisis kimana insparanga kambe hinik pa banco de comida alishi que más ya comida bemen chanya enlatada betuen seri kulishina no sirve men chanya que maya enga hiniranga lo pilla sa shi me chesa shambe insparanga shi porque ma pens como piakte shika indete verdura beya apenas pikun anda shi de 100 cortari talashika ya san hupar kambe par hupara azúcar ambe y tu kambe
creo que fue una desigualdad muy grande cuando al principio dijeron vamos a cerrar tal y tal trabajo. De ahí fue una desigualdad en la cuestión o en el punto de que las personas que tenían sus documentos, ellos podían aplicar por el desempleo. Entonces ellos no se iban a quedar total de ceros, como comenta la compañera que ya le preocupaba tanto de dónde iba a sacar para la renta. Claro que a lo mejor no iban a recibir el mismo dinero, aunque creo que les dieron un bono extra o algo así. Entonces, para ellos no fue lo mismo, para la comunidad que tiene sus documentos no fue lo mismo como la comunidad que no los tiene. Desde ahí miré una desigualdad muy grande, porque yo dije, todos están trabajando, todos le echan ganas a trabajar, a esforzarse, a dar para el país. ¿Por qué no recibir lo mismo? En esa cuestión después se dio un cheque, pero también ahí fueron excluidos la gente que no tenía que no teníamos o que no tiene sus documentos. Ahí también fue una desigualdad muy grande porque yo digo, es gente que trabaja duro y no que trabaja más duro, pero yo miro, a veces hay gente que es anglosajona, no quiero hacer como discriminación ni nada de eso, ¿verdad? Pero veo que no se esfuerza lo mucho que a veces nuestra gente se esfuerza por salir adelante, por hacer bueno el trabajo, trabajos que otras personas no quieren hacer, y al momento de cuando se repartieron esos cheques dijeron no, ellos no están incluidos porque no tienen un social security number, entonces no los vamos a incluir. Escuché que gracias a tu familia, Antonio, a los bancos de comida, algunos bancos de comida que estuvieron como aquí, el Pastor Mark, que estuvo muy al pendiente para proporcionarles alimentos pues a las personas que lo necesitaban en su momento, ¿verdad? En Seattle, como Casa Latina, que supe que estaban dando despensas, pero simplemente eran despensas y nada más que yo supiera. No se preocupaban por ejemplo, algún bill o algo que como decía la compañera que se quedó 5 meses sin trabajar, pero los billes siguen, esos allí no paran. Los niños necesitaban su internet, teníamos que aplicar o tenían que aplicarse para que teníamos que tener mucha información y a veces no nos llegaba la información de que hay tal programa que está dando el internet gratis en este momento, pero a veces como comentábamos no tenemos la experiencia de estar online. Se nos cerraron muchas puertas en la cuestión de que a veces se tenía que aplicar mucho online, pero nosotros no estamos muy familiarizados con lo del online.
También un joven que no está entrenado para algo así no lo va a poder hacer, ¿no? Un niño, adolescente o peor, uno más pequeño, ¿no? Pues aunque ellos usan la tecnología para su uso, para su escuela, ello no implica que ellos saben navegar el sistema, ¿no? Y ese es algo que se desenmascara también, ¿no? De cómo quieren recurrir a la parte tecnológica sin tomar en cuenta a las comunidades nativas o miembros de los pueblos originarios como nosotros, que nosotros no tuvimos acceso a las tecnologías o a entender cómo utilizar las nuevas tecnologías. No ha sido por elección propia, no fue que nosotros dijimos, oh, yo soy flojo y no quiero hacerlo. Fue este sistema clasista y racista que no nos tomó en cuenta a nosotros como pueblos originarios, ¿verdad? Que hasta ahora nosotros por nuestros propios medios, ¿verdad? Estamos tratando de abogar, porque sí hay que decirlo también, ¿no? Así públicamente también agradecer tecnología que estamos utilizando ahorita, fue por una gestión que hicimos nosotros como Ireta Purhepecha, ¿no? Para decirle a las autoridades del condado, necesitamos un medio de comunicación, necesitamos un medio donde podamos estar informando a nuestra comunidad.
Yo por ese aspecto sí terminé así muy frustrado, ¿verdad? Como hay tanta desigualdad, ¿verdad? Por la razón de no tener un número de seguro social, ¿verdad? No tener no poder obtener un apoyo por parte del gobierno. Como yo, mis hijos son nacidos aquí y yo no recibo ellos no reciben ningún tipo de ayuda a ellos, ¿verdad? Y más sin embargo yo en el momento de reportar yo mis impuestos, pues ellos no dicen tú no lo vas a hacer porque tú tienes un IT, ¿no? Tengo que pues desembolsar para pagar mis impuestos. Entonces por ese aspecto yo sí terminé como frustrado, ¿verdad? El cómo nos han hecho a un lado por esa razón de no tener un número de seguro social para poder obtener, como las personas, pues esas personas, los que tienen un número de seguro social, pues no les afectó mucho, ¿verdad? Les dijeron van a parar de trabajar, no van a trabajar, y mucha gente pues pues se encerraron, se cuidaron, estuvieron en sus casas porque pues, el gobierno les estuvo mandando el desempleo, ¿no? A varias personas, a mucha gente, a la mayoría. Pero como en mi caso personal pues no era así, ¿verdad? Sí, con el tiempo pues sí llegué a preocuparme. Yo les decía, ¿no? A lo que yo me dedico, pues esos lugares fueron muy afectados. Yo sí, más de un año pues estuve yo sin trabajar. Seguí varios enlaces que salía en Facebook, salía en internet, ¿no? Que si aplicabas a lo mejor te iban a ayudar con algo. Yo hice tres aplicaciones, y de esas tres me negaron en dos, pero en una sí obtuve un apoyo, ¿no? Por parte del gobierno. En esos tiempos cuando estuvimos contagiados ahí en mi casa, a mí me ayudaron ¿cómo se llaman estos? El departamento de bomberos. Ellos fueron a obsequiarnos comida, a obsequiarnos cosas de limpieza y todo ese tipo de cosas. Y me dejaron un número para para que yo llamara. Y llamamos, pero ahí sí fue mucho fue muy frustrante ahí, porque hacer ese tipo de llamadas pues nomás nunca contestaban. Y dejabas tu número, pero nunca devolvían la llamada. O sea, prácticamente no hubo no hubo apoyo por ese lado. Ireta Purhepecha igual me proporcionó un número de una persona, y esa persona se contactó conmigo, no recuerdo cómo se llama, creo Coalición para los Inmigrantes, algo así mencionó el nombre. Y ellos sí me dieron un apoyo también ellos. Pero también fue porque Ireta Purhepecha pues tuvo que ver algo, ¿no? Para estar ahí apoyándonos, pues. Exacto. Yo tuve una conversación con una persona un miembro de Ireta Purhepecha. Entonces yo le platicaba, ¿verdad? Que pues que estaba sin trabajar. Y esa persona me dice, ¿por qué no haces modificar un poco de tus tarjetas de presentación? Y yo le digo, sí, ¿verdad? Tuvo mucho sentido esa palabra, lo que él me dijo, porque yo solamente hice eso, hice una modificación de mis tarjetas de presentación y empecé a empezar de nuevo a moverme, y gracias a que a que yo salí a repartir mis tarjetas, pues empezó a caer un poco de trabajo. Sí, ya todos de mi familia ya nos vacunamos. Ya recibí las 2 vacunas. Fue por la razón, por lo mismo que yo trabajo en lugares donde hay personas y tengo contacto con muchas personas. Y esa fue la razón que pues yo anduve igual buscando a ver dónde pudieran vacunarme para agarrarlo entre más rápido, pues para mí era mejor, ¿no? Y hubo la oportunidad y no me tuvieron en espera ni en la lista, sino que luego me dijeron, no, pues aquí está, si te quieres vacunar. Y nos vacunamos, ya en mi familia todos nos vacunamos, ¿verdad? Yo quisiera compartir algo, ¿verdad? Para mi comunidad, para los purépechas, ¿verdad? En nosotros hay mucha ignorancia, hay mucho, pues desconocimiento más que nada, ¿verdad? De la magnitud del problema que causa el COVID-19. El problema es muy grave y la gente lo toma muy así, muy simple, que como si fuera una gripita, y no es así. Mucha gente, yo conozco mucha gente y me entero de cosas por otras personas, de que nuestra gente, al ya estar contagiados, ellos no quieren avisar que están contagiados, de hablarles a otras personas, sabes que no vengas a mi casa, aquí está pasando esto. No sé yo la razón por qué lo hacen. Yo quisiera decirles, verdad, que no sean así, deben de que salga esto a la luz. Esto no nomás les está pasando a ellos o a ciertas personas. Esto es grave. Al avisarle a la otra persona le podemos salvarle la vida, porque al no decirlo pues lo estamos poniendo más en riesgo, no nomás a ciertas personas, sino que a mucha gente, pues que no les dé vergüenza. Si les llega a dar, no pasa nada, no son los primeros ni van a ser los últimos, ¿verdad? Porque esto pues ya está aquí, se está viviendo a la orden del día. Y mucha gente, aún así, aunque ya mucha gente se está vacunando, pues, pero hay gente también que de igual manera pues no se quieren vacunar. Y sabemos que son las personas que ahorita están llegando a los hospitales.
¿Me vacuné? Sí me vacuné. ¿Por qué me vacuné? Porque yo ya viví la enfermedad y la verdad, en cuanto tuve la posibilidad de ponerme la vacuna, yo no lo pensé 2 veces. No quiero volver a pasar lo que pasé. Y yo siempre les digo y les aconsejo y les dije y les sigo diciendo a quien no se haya vacunado que se vacunen, porque no saben lo que se siente. La enfermedad es muy fuerte, muy horrible. En mi experiencia fue horrible. Entonces me vacuné por eso, porque tuve miedo a volverme a enfermar. Tuve miedo a si una vez me salvé, no sabía si la próxima vez lo podía hacer. Tengo mis hijos pequeños, pensé en ellos. Tengo mi familia, mis papás, que pensé en ellos también, que de hecho ellos tuvieron que cancelar el año pasado su viaje que tenían para venir con mi hija para su graduación por lo mismo de la pandemia y que tenía miedo de que se contagiaran. Lo hice con esa finalidad de proteger a mi familia, pero también proteger a mi comunidad, proteger a mis amigos, cuidar a nuestra gente mayor, a nuestra gente que está vulnerable, que tiene algunas enfermedades. Mi consejo es que se vacunen, que tenemos que, para convivir, que no va a ser lo mismo. Ya no vamos o sea, vamos a tener una nueva normalidad, sería nueva normalidad. Ya no vamos a llegar a la normalidad de antes, porque de hecho ya esto llegó y al parecer se va a quedar.
La gente de mi pueblo, que se vacunen, por favor, que no esperen hasta que se enfermen, porque uno dice pues que es fácil, que no le va a dar, pero como les digo, yo ya pasé por ahí, yo ya sentí cómo se siente. Por eso les digo que por favor se vacunen, no se esperen hasta que se enfermen.
This is our second panel where we are interviewing program coordinators of Irata Purhepecha to discuss through their perspectives how has this time been used as a time of reflection, but also in a time to see how we can advocate for the local governments to grow and change.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Olga Araceli Prado Leon. I'm from the Nahuatl community in Michoacan, and we usually just speak Spanish. A lot of the folks in our community have lost the Purhepecha language. And I've lived in Washington for 18 years now.
Hi, I'm Daisy. My family is from Tingambato, Michoacan, and similar to Olga, the language has been lost for a few generations now. But I was born in Washington State, so I've lived here 26 years now.
Hello, everybody. My name is Claudia Flores Bucio. I'm originally from Uruapan, Michoacan, and then we migrated over here when I was 2 years old. So I've been living here for about, how old are you already?
21.
22 years in the South King County region. And Spanish is mostly spoken in our household, but we grew up listening to a lot of our elders and aunts and uncles and family members speaking Purhepecha.
And my name is Erandi Flores Bucio. I would say our indigenous roots come from Quinceo, Michoacan, since that is the pocket community in which I grew up in my early childhood. And then as well as belonging to the Purhepecha diaspora community that's currently being created. The languages that are used at home, I think a lot of the younger people, we always spoke in English, like even amongst like my cousins, like we all speak in English. We have very minimal Spanish skills, I think, or at least enough to communicate for sure. And then there is a good amount of young people that know how to speak Purhepecha, but it's mostly aunts and uncles, my dad's generation, that still speak Purhepecha. And then, like Claudia mentioned, I was born here. We started off in South Park, and then moved to Auburn, and we just lived there for the past couple of years.
I think before I recognized the indigeneity of the customs and traditions that I was familiar with and that I grew up with, I just thought it was different than what other like Mexicans would do. And so it wasn't really until like I met all of you and, Irata Purhepecha that I recognized that indigeneity and that I realized that these were customs and traditions, right, that our ancestors had left in a way through colonization. Generations try to leave it to us in like hidden ways, specifically within the Catholic traditions. And so it's been really important to me as I've like recognized the traditional ways that it's more of like learning to also make it a lifestyle, and really has like given like validity, I guess, to like every of all the thoughts and processes that I would think of, and like just who I am as a person who likes to help, and as who we were as Purhepechas and who we are now, and how that's something that's like really been incorporated into like our communities. And so it's been really important to make sure that I recognize that even in moments that I forget, so that as I bring, like more little ancestors over, and future generations, that they have that too, and to remember and to continue to bring that forth.
Yeah, similar to Olga, we've had this discussion so many times where, say there was a party and we start doing our customs like La Canaraqua, and then my friends would start freaking out like, oh my god, this is so cool, what is this? And I'm like, you don't do this at your parties, like when people get married, bodas, quinceañeras, like everything. And they'd be like, no, I have no idea. And realizing that I can't identify as Mexican because nothing that I do with my family is the Mexican culture. And so similar, once I met everybody from Irata Purhepecha, like all the dots started connecting on their own, and I started to realize like, okay, this is an indigenous lifestyle that unfortunately, because of colonization, my family has tried to get so far away from, and it's based off survival. Like the fact that we had to assimilate to survive in our regions. And so now to me, being Purhepecha means that there's people I can point to and say that's my community, and we'll help each other. We're there for each other on all types of levels, friends, family, or mutual aid most of the times. But yeah, it's all been connecting recently for me.
So for me, I think Purhepecha identity, especially as I got older, was like almost an act of rebellion for me. Of like being able to identify with something. I remember in those things in classrooms when we would make presentations, like I would choose to do them on Purhepecha culture just because we had the sports and we had our own flag, we had so much rich culture, and the food that I knew not a lot of people didn't know what they were, like positica mata and choripo, and like some of my favorite dishes. But I also recognize that I think as I'm getting older, it's also being able to heal, because I have found myself almost in the defense with Purhepecha identity, almost in a sense of wanting to gatekeep Purhepecha identity. But I recognize within myself that is also a response to knowing that I've never had the option to not be Purhepecha. But I will say that was a choice that started within my grandmother when they first migrated to Uruapan. That was her decision to keep the identity, and then my father's decision, and therefore our decision. And so it's like when you are so aware with your identity, you obviously are more in tune with the political structures and the way that has impacted you in education and governments, but also in the health aspects of the health repercussions, such as like the alcoholism and the drug usage and fighting with addiction within generations of families. And so I think that leaves me in a state of seeing Purhepecha and identity in a very holistic state, and knowing that my identity is something that I also have to heal with, especially with seeing like, and we talked about Ana Yuli before we started, but I think definitely when I met Ana Yuli and I saw Purhepecha women doing work within the territory, it gave me even a different perspective of Purhepecha identity. It also made me heal that part of like knowing that no, we do have our place. And as much as like they like to excuse how they say abusos en costumbres, abuse in customs, that there is so much work to be done. And so I feel like I'm very much in my early 20s figuring out truly what it means to me, and still in the process of figuring out.
Yeah, I think if you all didn't notice by now, me and Randy are siblings, they're sisters. So a lot of the identity, figuring out who we are, and the same experiences have been about the same. Maybe I just older, and then my immigration status being different than Randy might be a little bit different. But we grew up, going through the same things. We're only like three 3.5 years apart. As Randy had mentioned at first, like when we first moved here to the United States, we I don't know if it's just a Purhepecha thing or if it's other Mexican families do it or other indigenous communities do it, but we all like to live really close to each other, practically neighbors. So we all lived in the same apartment complex in South Park. All my neighbors, and they were all either family or parientes, so people from the same town. And that's how we were we were staying connected, because we didn't really know anybody else here, and slowly we all started trying to figure out other resources, but that's how we all helped each other out. We were the first like family unit that moved out here to Auburn, and then that's when I really noticed the difference of being indigenous compared to South Park, where I wasn't going to school yet and I just lived the same experiences as my cousins. We were going through the same customs and traditions and trying to also learn what it means to live here in the United States. As it was like the first 10 years of our lives, first 5 years of our parents' lives of migrating here. So then when I moved to Auburn, I really saw that difference, that impact of not listening to community speak Purhepecha, only my dad with his cousins, of course, now. And then from there on, I think the way to connect was we would visit every weekend. So even though we grew up in Auburn, every weekend it was going to Burien, going to either going to the apartments in South Park, or we would go to the Heights. And we still stayed very connected that way, and it was like through customs, so like through parties and so then I remember a lot of the times, like, what do I want to keep from being Purhepecha and what do I want to let go, and also sometimes letting go of those things, and especially in Kinseo community, they'll start in our community that they start saying that we're kind of embarrassed of their traditions and our customs and our ways. But it's not, because I don't feel embarrassed about the things, the alcohol, and sometimes having to witness certain violence in our community. It's more about, like, I know it wasn't healthy, and I know it was somewhat traumatizing. Now that, I speak with my friends and my cousins, and it's not something I want to repeat. And so it's been a struggle of constantly, like, what do I want to keep? What do I want to let go? And also not being such an active member of my own community, as in Kinseo. Like, I'm active with Ireta Purhepecha and with speaking with other Purhepecha activists back home, but with my own community, other than helping with resources and with what I can do, and from a distance, kind of, not actively participating in the traditions and the customs because of what I had mentioned earlier. So it's been a struggle of what does it mean to be Purhepecha to me, and I'm still figuring that out. And I'm hoping, as I go to Sweat and I participate in Temascal, or in different activities that belong to us and our ancestor left us, and I start to figure out what it means to me.
Yeah. So when I was thinking and overlooking about this question, I remember that conversation we had. I think it was like when things were just starting in the summer, where we were like, should we take on this other project, right? And what that would mean for us, and the work that we had to do and everything. And we all concluded that, like, if we weren't to do this work, then who was, especially for our communities. And so we saw how important it was that there was someone that they could identify with. That was important because then they could relate to someone who could speak Purhepecha, right?
It's a lot safer sometimes too, I think, when it's women approaching typically the other women in the Purhepecha community, asking if they need a resource, where if it's somebody from the county, it can be kind of intimidating.
Before Ireta Purhepecha started the COVID response team, we weren't really resource based. We did it individually as a group. We have always done mutual aid for each other. So, like, if someone's family member passes away in our community, we're quick to, like, do kermeses, or fundraisers, help. We're always there for community and those members of Ireta and then those that are close to Ireta. But this time it was different because my dad, my mom saw this need of there needs to be food for a community, but culturally appropriate food, because a lot of the food banks would not give culturally appropriate food. So we went ahead and started that, and around there my dad was contacting Purhepecha community like, hey, come over, we have these food boxes you're welcome to take. And then community was coming over and telling my dad while they were there, kind of like, hey, this is what's going on, so and so is sick, so and so lost their job, or I'm about to lose my housing, or whatever was going on in their personal life. They would disclose because they felt comfortable with my dad. And a lot of times these conversations were in Purhepecha.
Because the frustration led for my dad to go on the King County live streams and like be like, what are you guys doing for community? Like, you know, pointing out things and stuff that he was noticing. And that's when someone reached out from the county like, hey, there's this group of community navigators or people from that work within the community in order to be able to like obtain resources. And that's when it started having a direct connection with the county.
Yeah. So that's what we had noticed, is that, you know, we didn't have that direct communication before. So we're like, if no one's gonna do it, and then a lot of these resources that were coming out, like for rent assistance at the beginning, they weren't very user friendly for our community. They were struggling, and us knowing sometimes a little bit knowing more about, also just generational, knowing which paperwork they would need or how to scan, how to use certain programs. We were able to support that way, but it was frustrating. Like, you all need to change these things because it's not easy to access for the people who need it the most. So that was our frustration. And then my dad got involved with community navigators, and then from there on brought us along. And then because we saw that it was a lot of work.
One thing that I want to add too is that I think something important about us is that we're seen as like a safe space, right? Because in each of our communities we have that of like, oh, no le vayas a decir, or don't go tell, or don't let other people know about this.
The struggles.
Yeah, the struggles. And so we were seen like, and that was really important for us too, that we kept things like confidential, or that folks know that it was safe, to talk about everything that was going on.
I think I just want to add on to elaborate what Daisy said earlier, that a lot of the times knowing the traditions and customs from our community, we're able to support in a better way, because a lot of the times even Latinx or Hispanic community, Mexican community don't know those certain traditions and or customs or things that we have to respect.
So many of these larger orgs say that they are trained to work with Indigenous communities, but time and time, like, we see that that's not true. Or a lot of the times within their becas, within the stuff that they ask for us, they ask for Indigenous communities, and they've written down stuff about us, and it can be really extractive of where they
or
tell
demeaning.
us, yeah. And so I think that was the other thing, is like, I knew I have the capacity to write and get those becas that they're asking for, and I know that it will be given directly to community.
I think we've just seen first of all, the lack of resources that were available to our community, and how that really got us moving into making sure we try to figure out and also advocate for them and make sure that these resources were available. And then, like, personally, it was really coming, like, an understanding of, like, how hard it can hit, because my whole family got it, and then my partner's family got it too, and then we lost his grandpa. And it wasn't until, like, after that, like, things kind of kept, and he's from Michoacan, they're from Zamora, but the things kind of started to pop up of, like, all the knowledge that he had, and, like, from the language, from traditions, from even, like, different things that he had learned, I guess, and saw from his childhood, and then like just like medicine. There you go. And he never like shared, and so now just like reflecting, like back on it, like they're like, you know, like a library or book that just, you know, that we lost. And so
Yeah, similar. Going through COVID has been such a roller coaster because I think for most of us, we have to deal with what's going on here in our direct communities that we live and engage with on the daily, but then also hearing what's going on in our homelands. My mom was like, oh, there's a funeral today, we have to send money. There's a funeral again tomorrow, we have to send money. And it just became like a weekly thing. And it was like, do you have $5 to give? Like, we need to send some money to these people. And so it's like having to grieve what's going on here in the US while we're also grieving what's going on in our home country. I got COVID myself, and I got the Delta variant, which was horrible. I was fully vaccinated. I felt like I was about to die for like 5 days, where I couldn't move. I couldn't get off my bed, while my kiddo, that's 7 years old, also tested positive, and they were completely fine. They were just like playing in the next room while I was like, I'm body aching, help me.
When I think about the ways that COVID-19 has impacted the Purhepecha community, like there's so much layers. There's like how the way it's impacted at the Purhepecha, because, you know, we're a mixture of Purhepecha folks from, you know, all over the diaspora. But then also how has it impacted the pocket communities that exist here, and we all belong to different pocket communities, and the ways we've seen it impacted there. And then also, like Daisy mentioned, in the home territory. It was also a time where we also connected a lot with Purhepecha women. It was so interesting that it happened here at the simultaneously time we were connecting virtually. But one of the tactics that we did do for the Purhepecha community, we knew that those that were going to be hit the hardest, or possibly the most vulnerable, were the women in our community that are separated from their husbands, especially because, one, we know for them to be single mothers, but also they face a lot of stigma in our community and can't easily ask for help as much as others can. So we got connected with them, and as much as like we found different resources, you know, we would always make sure to, we were like, oh yeah, this one, make sure that they're at the top of our list. The other thing is that like a family member in our household did, you know, take this difficult and, you know, ended up in the hospital due to mental health. And when that individual is like ready to talk about their experience, like, you know, our space is always going to be open to talk about from that perspective. But it definitely was really challenging to realize like how difficult it was. And like I remember like one time, and even one of like my dad's prayers, I remember him saying like oh, what we would do to just like take back like all these opportunities, take everything, if it meant for like for this individual to be okay. And so if that really hit me, because at the same time that I knew that all these opportunities were so amazing, especially like as a young person to be 21 and being program manager of different things and feeling like these were amazing career opportunities, to be like one of like the worst years of my life. It was definitely difficult. But I also feel like it's a time of growing, because I remember when Ana Yuli, who like now I see as like a role model to me, we were on a live stream, and after we were done, it was a conversation about abuse that Purhepecha women face in the territory. And when she finished the live stream, like we stuck behind and a handful of us talked with her, and she was just like started crying, and she was like, you know, often I'm in spaces where I'm always defending in defense mode, always having to have my guard up. But this was like the first time that I was able to feel like, instead of that, like I had people protecting me. And I felt very much like of this sense of like I'm going through a lot of reflections and a lot of good things, but also being able to recognize that pain that I'm feeling within our household unit. So
and I think, you know, to elaborate on that, you know, having my own, I went through a pregnancy during COVID. At the beginning of COVID, I got pregnant right away, and I wasn't really planning on having another baby so soon, but he came, and we love him so much, and he's our little sunshine. But going through that was really rough, and then seeing my family, not being able to be there for my family because I was pregnant, so I had to step away from community, and having the difference of being not even like a year and a half before that giving birth, and being pregnant without COVID was totally different. So that experience was very different and very isolating. And, a lot of the times I wanted to be there for my family or community, but I had to miss out because I was pregnant and trying to take care of myself and, and of my baby. But we're also, even though we don't share publicly, we're also an open book, and we learn through those experiences to help other people through those same experiences, like Randy said, of mental health, because a lot of the times my family went through this, and we went through a lot of like barriers, I guess, and we didn't know how to navigate it. And a lot of the times when we asked for support, our friends didn't know how to navigate it either, because it's not so clear. Like, what do you do when one of your family members go through these mental health crises? We also noticed this pattern in our community, so we were able to kind of tell them like, hey, this is how we went about it and what resources are available. It seemed like it was a very common thing, and it's been reported, right? It's been reported that it's been going worldwide, a lot of depression, anxiety, and different things going on. But now being directly connected to community, we've been able to notice that it's also been affecting Purhepecha community as well.
Like I said, even as someone who knows the language, knows about navigating certain things, and even then it was a challenge for me, I think, to find the resources and making sure those resources then were distributed, or how I could support, and really thinking about how much also I could take on, or how much we could take on, because it was such heavy work. But just, I think, highlighting the way that everything went virtual, and then, or by phone, or, the language access, those were a lot of the barriers that we were faced with, like King County or the different counties, to then statewide, that we noticed that there was just a lot of barriers, even though they're we want to, work with grassroots organizations, or we want to help the community, and want to do this and do that. But then they didn't make the process easy. They weren't willing to have someone walk through that process with us. Even then, that would have been really helpful. We're not asking you to do the work. We're just asking you to help us or guide us so then we could do the work, right? Because they're the ones who are putting up these barriers or these structures, and then that our community doesn't know how to navigate. Or even me, who's practically grown up here, know how to navigate either. And so it's just frustrating and hard for, I think, me personally, and then probably for us. It just always reminded me of what my parents would say, entonces ¿para qué vas a la escuela? Why'd you go to school for then? But it's just okay, yeah, I did, but there's just certain things and barriers that they're putting up that I don't know how to face, or how to bring them down.
Oh my goodness, yes. How much we struggled with that, because even though some of us have college education, or even then have some familiarity when it comes to filling out applications, no one could prepare us for the amount of bureaucratic structures that exist, that are just so challenging and so time consuming and so repetitive. That is the part that drove me insane, is having to repeat things or having
translate.
Yeah, it was so difficult. And so therefore, from our side as Irata Purhepecha, it's not created equitable for grassroots organizations such as us. It's not taking into consideration that that a lot of the things that they're asking, this was our first year receiving money.
Yeah.
So we don't even 100% know what we're doing, but we're attempting our best.
Yeah.
The county or the state or whichever place that we're getting our funding from that needs to like be able to recognize things are gonna be slower, the process is gonna be slower, because we're making sure that we want to make the things be done right. And like how Claudia mentioned, it's in all the different aspects, like in all. And mental health was one where, like, we as a family, as you could say, like, you could say that we're educated in different levels and different things. Navigating the mental health system and being able to find the answers was one of the things that were so draining, especially when you come from a family that it's not going to allow things to slide, is not going to allow for discrimination to happen, especially when you're dealing with a community of color. And when it comes to how people view with mental health struggles, how a lot of things can be misinterpretation, especially the adultification of young children of color. And so there was just so many different levels of how I realized that the structure of mental health, and even completely changing my view on the way I see people that, you know, like face mental health structure.
Yeah, I would say definitely a big no, that it's not equitable at all. I have no experience with like the nonprofit industrial complex. Like, I do not at all. My background is just like social justice kind of stuff, and I work at a court. Like, it has nothing to do with what I do on the outside. But just like coming from someone that had no experience in like filling out applications for grants, like I give all three of you guys the biggest kudos for that, because I looked at one and I was like, whoa, where do you even start with this? Because you have to write out the proposal. You have to know already what you're going to spend the money on, when the counties, the cities, the state doesn't realize that things are constantly changing. Needs are constantly changing. And just, yeah, like the fact that when we do have to like do applications for people, we're taking the time to break down the questions for them, where nonprofits aren't. Nonprofits get frustrated. Like, I've seen the way nonprofits treat people when it comes to filling out applications. They're kind of just like, you're not prepared. Like, it just reminds me of when I was a kid and we used to go to places. Say we were filling out an application to help us with like some legal immigration stuff, or like at the legal clinics or the rental assistance or food banks and food pantries. It would be so difficult, and like say my mom forgot one person's like ID, then it would completely stop the process, and they would just give my mom like the most frustrated look and be like, how are you not prepared? Like, how do you not have this? We gave you a checklist. And I know we do that to people sometimes too, like, oh, make sure you come with this, but we don't give them that same type of attitude. We're just like, oh, it's okay, like, you know, we can fix this, like, we can either have you submit it later or whatever, you know. We understand that we need to be flexible. And these structures are just, they're rooted and they were built on white supremacy, so it's not even built for us, and now they're trying to create the space to invite us into it. But they're still not changing it. They're just changing the wording. They're just changing their language. They're just changing their mission statements. But they're not actually doing the back end work. Because then you look at their board of directors and it's just a whole bunch of white people that are not being considerate of the communities that they're serving, you know? And then when a community does speak up and not complain, but let them know and try and hold them accountable, you risk a lot. You risk either losing the funds or being labeled as an angry organization or confrontational, when it's like,
or
no,
problematic to work with.
Yeah, problematic to work with. But it's, no, we are advocating for our communities and we're angry for them, because a lot of the time they don't even realize what is going on and the entire struggle, all of that. But yeah, I would say it's not equitable at all.
I agree. I agree with both of you. I think, you know, Olga has a lot of the language that sometimes we needed to fill out these paperwork, like these forms. So I'd feel very intimidated to fill them out. So I'd be like, Olga, and then Olga's like, you can do it. And I was like, yeah, but I feel like I can't do it as good as you. Thank you, Olga, for doing all that work. And so a lot of the time, and this is so frustrating and make us so mad, we needed to have the money, and then they would repay, like reimburse us.
Yeah.
Luckily, from funds that when we would get kind of are kind of paid for the work that we would do. So in each paycheck, and then they're not big, someone since then. They're not big.
No, they're not.
We would donate money to the bank account.
Yeah.
To la caja. So then that's how we were able to fund our projects, and then we would get reimbursed. So if we applied for a certain grant or a certain resource, a lot of the time, like, they expected us to do the work, and then they would give us the money, which sometimes it didn't add up. Like, we ended up having to spend more or do more of the extra work, exhausting work. Like, I remember there'd be like 2 weeks where we'd be working every day from the morning till the night. I was doing the paperwork part, and then waiting in the evening to talk to community for whatever reason it was, or calling them to set up certain meetings. And when we did the vaccine clinic, that was so exhausting. I'm sorry I signed us all up for it, but it was so exhausting. Like, I got no sleep because you're just thinking at night too, like, oh, I need to get this done. Like, should I just be making a list right now while I'm awake? Because if not, I won't be able to sleep, because all night I'm dreaming of what I need to get done. We try to give as much back to the community, but also pay people to do, to help us, clean the space that we're going to have the vaccine clinic, or provide food and do all these things. And sometimes they don't think about that. They don't think about, like, you need to pay people to do things. Like, it's not because these people are greedy or they don't want to help, but because they deserve to get paid for the labor that they're providing for us.
Or that it's just as important as the paperwork we do.
Yeah, it's just as important. And they don't think about that stuff. And a lot of the times, so we had to put the money, and then we would get it reimbursed, and then those checks would take forever to come. And when we tried to tell people, like the county or the state, like, we don't know what we're doing when it comes to, like, keeping track of how to keep track of records and stuff, they're like, oh, well, sorry, we can't really help you with that. And like, well, I thought you wanted to help community-based, So that's been one of the most frustrating things, is that trying to keep track of everything has been really, really hard and has been really time-consuming, when we rather just be doing the actual work of talking to community, being with community, being in community with each other, instead of sitting there for hours doing this paperwork, translating so that they understand the paperwork. Like, so even though all those things are horrible and they're not my favorite, and I'm assuming it's none of our favorites, it was all worth it once we saw the outcome of it. We didn't do it for the county. We didn't do it for the state. We didn't do it but for community. So even though we did all those things to, like, to provide evidence that we're doing it, once we got community, my dad, going back to my dad all the time, my dad said it's like, we're tired, but it's a good kind of tired. It's just tired, like, I did something, that's going to benefit not just my family, but my community, and people asked for it, and I was able to kind of help provide this resource.
Before jumping in, I just want to say that I want to applaud us too, because and anyone who helped, because we were doing all of this while, taking care of family, while working like our full-time job, while doing so many other things. So this was just something that we're like, we have to, we have to do, because then it's not going to get done. So that was also a big ask. I think the virtual workshops and everything, like from information and even like the infographics that we, were created and all of that, was really such a good resource for the families who weren't sure where to get their information from. And so that was really, really helpful. And we got like a lot of people, right? I think at some point even they were from like out of state, and then some in the territory. And so that was really good. So all of that, I think just the way that we were really intentional about making sure that information was shared in English and Spanish and even in Purhepecha, right? That was really important and really good work. And so
yeah, and just to add on to like the workshops, what was really cool was right before we did the vaccination clinic, we hosted like a COVID FYI, like if you had any questions, you could come on and speak to a doctor. And so if people had questions, and people did have really good questions on there, that was really helpful. And then because out of that, we also made graphics that are still getting circulated that are also about like what's Moderna doing, what's Pfizer doing, what are the differences. And then we also had some graphics made on like common things people believe about COVID that aren't true. And then, yeah, just like the online virtuals, workshops were really good to have during COVID. I just feel like it's a very safe space. Like what I keep saying, we've created that, if anything, is such a safe space for our community to come to and let us know what their needs are. And that they feel heard and seen and like held, I guess, because yeah, like if someone came for cash assistance or food vouchers or the clinic, they felt comfortable enough to like message us and let us know like, hey, this is going on, I need some support. And then we would try and figure out like which one of us could support. People in our community are very like, if I don't know you and I don't know your mom, I'm not going to talk to you because I don't know you. I don't feel safe. And so a lot of time it took like Erandi or Claudia messaging and being like, oh yeah, Daisy is with Ireta Purhepecha. And then they would call me back because they felt okay to talk to me. So I just think that was like such an important thing. But yeah, that clinic, it was a lot of work. And I think one of the beautiful things that came out of that was that we didn't just have the vaccination clinic. We also had dispensas. We had food. We were giving people PPE and food.
Sweating.
Yeah, after that, like we were making care packages, and there was a lot of people that were not Purhepecha that came. People from Auburn here locally that were like, oh, we saw it. We wanted to come down. And they were just like astonished. And so like, oh my God, you guys are giving us like all of these things. Like, that's amazing. Like, I never thought I would get PPE.
There was even like excitement. Like I remember like something that's just gonna stick with me is this person who like came with their little vaccination card and they're like, I'm here to get my second dose. And then after they got their second dose, they're like, I'm fully vaccinated. Are you like, we're all fully vaccinated.
Yeah.
And they were just so excited. And I was like, oh, like that, I think they wouldn't have shown that excitement or like, you know, like wanting to talk to others about like now we're all vaccinated, you know, kind of thing, if it was in another space.
Yeah.
Ireta Purhepecha did not want to force anybody to get the vaccine. We really respected people's body autonomy. So if they told us straight up no, then okay, thank you for your time, and that was it. So we just wanted to make it easier for those who did want to get vaccinated or who were kind of hesitant and needed a little bit more information.
Yeah.
So we just went ahead and wanted to just make it more accessible and easier for them.
I'm so sorry if I butcher this. How would you define haraprakwa? What others might know, or how others might know it, mutual aid. What are your thoughts around the increased usage of this ideology in organizing spaces across the country?
I think it's just how we all have described it. You know, working with one another in community and making it like accessible. I think that's something that we've always like aimed for, trying to make sure that like whatever we are doing is explained really well and that like it's open and that community feels comfortable like reaching out to, and that if any need comes up that then they could, you know, let us know. And it's just, again, going back to that like lifestyle, right, of who we are and wanting to help and all that. And I think about what Tata Antonio says, that sometimes people refer like Purhepechas as like los que se visitan, or those who like visit each other. And I think with that is always of like when we go somewhere, like bringing something with, you know, like we never come like empty-handed. And so it has to do with all of that, and just making each other, you know, like checking in with each other and saying like how we're all like doing, just being in community.
What always sticks with me is like what your guys' dad says, that the Marco Antonio, hoy serás tú, pero mañana quizás yo, or sería yo. And like a perfect example of that was one time I helped someone out with some immigration papers, And they were also Purhepecha, and they were very like persistent on paying me, and they were like, not for filling out the application, but for taking time to help me with this. And I was like, no, no, no. Like, they kept putting the money in my hand, and I kept putting it back in their hand, even though like I needed that money at that time. I still was like, no, I can't take your money. Like, no, I won't take it. And then like it hit me. I was like, this is like when my tias do it, and they're like, take the money. Like, you know it's disrespectful if you don't take the money. So I remember taking the money and being like, how can I help this woman in the long run? Because I know that she also needs the help. And then, yeah, like I've ended up helping her throughout a few years, and it's like she helps me out sometimes, I help her out sometimes, and it's like a single mom thing where, you know, like you might need the help today and you'll receive that help, but then you end up helping someone else later on. And so it's like just the reciprocation of help, and it could be funds, access to funds, food vouchers, whatever it is. And it's making sure that the money or the food that you're getting is staying within community, and there's not all the barriers that you have to go through. Like mutual aid is like, it's like love and care for your community, and it's all staying within the community, and there's no like big huge nonprofit controlling it. And and like you make sure that those funds go to the community, like what we keep talking about. Like if Ireta Purhepecha gets direct donations, all those funds are going to community, because there's been plenty of times that I've also gotten help from the stuff that we do with Ireta Purhepecha, because yeah, it's hard out here. It's hard out here, and it's really nice to know that I'm helping people get the funds and kind of taking away that stigma of shame of being like, oh, I can't accept this because then what are they going to say? And I like when I called people from Tingambato to be like, hey, you should take this fund, they would be like, is there somebody else that needs it? Like, are you sure? Like, do you want to double check your list and then call me back? I would say, if you feel that you need it and you really do think that, you should take it, because if we're offering it to you, it's kind of like it's in your hands, and if you are willing to accept it, you should accept it. And we need to stop having all that shame around saying that we do need mutual aid. But I just feel like as community, we can't do it all on our own.
I think how you were earlier, you expressed yourself about advocacy and accountability. So I think mutual aid, like, yes, we do provide these resources, but we also try our best to make sure that when we do find these resources, that we hold these institutions accountable to bring it back to our community. And I think that's mutual aid is, you know, it's also advocating. It's also holding these institutions and to like holding them accountable. And that's part of the mutual aid. It's not just helping, it's also making these changes so that it is eventually more accessible to the community. It does come from us, but at the same time, it's like it just can't be like that anymore. So a lot of the times for us, we have to do that part of accountability, because our community is telling us, hey, it's not easy to come to the food bank. They're making it really hard. They're asking really unnecessary questions when I just need the food.
Not this food bank.
Not this, correction, not this food bank, but other food banks and other places, you know. They're making it really hard for me to access these needs. And then a lot of the time, as mutual aid and community love, we're like, okay, what can we do to change to make sure it's more accessible? So I think that's part of it too.
I was really like interested in asking you all this question because it's been a thought in my mind a lot, especially because I realized, especially because with the other communities, I asked them the same question: is there a way that you could define reciprocal aid, mutual aid in your language? And there was, and it's like, but they say it's like much more than just the word, though. It's a concept, and it's like I have to explain to you and provide you an example for me to explain it to you. And that's one thing that my dad, when they were asking these questions to community, would say, explain it to my daughter, someone, you know, or explain to my daughter, or as if you were explaining to your daughter or your son how do you define Haraperakwa? Sorry if I'm butchering it. And the other communities, from the Kichwa, they said that there's this Randi Randi. The Ñuu Savi, it's called Sai. And so I thought that was very beautiful. One, it was super important that, especially among these times of COVID-19, and we see mutual aid across the country being popped up, that it doesn't lose its roots, that this concept comes from Indigenous communities. Because a lot of us have not been able to historically work with the governments that have taken over our territories, and have had to create alternative ways, and even in ancestral practices on how community takes care of each other. And so one person described it to me, it's like, and that this is the way I saw it growing up, it's like for example, somebody passes away, and Daisy said that example, and everybody pitches in.
Even if it's like $5.
Because you don't know the day that someone in my family might pass away, and we're gonna need the community to come in and pitch in.
And then maybe it's not even money wise. Like if someone passes away and you're like close to the family, but you know you're not mourning as or grieving in the same level as they are, then you're gonna make sure the family has food, or you're there helping, you know, clean and
or
setting up or welcoming the guest of the family, as you know, as maybe the mother or the sibling might be not in the mood for all that, so you're making sure you're picking up that part of the
and then they were telling me that it's just this, like, the cycle that is created, but it's also something that is created within a much larger context, and was also giving another example that I saw growing up, which is when you come to a space that there's a celebration and you bring something, and then you remember that person brought something, so the next time that there's a celebration in their family, you bring something as well. So those are the ways I remember seeing it growing up. But now, as like I'm older and I see these things, how do we make sure that we're practicing this during times of COVID-19? Because especially when we've talked about that a lot of these systems are not reliable, to make sure that we have each other above everything. And so I think that's why these alternative pathways have been created. But I also think it's really important to always remember that these concepts do belong and came from Indigenous communities. And the proof is in the fact that we have words to encompass these concepts, and that talk about a lot. And sometimes things don't necessarily have to be super in theory, but have to be in practice and have to be seen.
I was just saying, it's also like a family thing, because like if by tomorrow, Dios no quisiera, but our parents were absent, you know, and let's say Olga had a better relationship with our parents, but because of the love and the connection that they have, she would provide that same mutual aid to us. And then it just keeps going, and then we would provide it to her children, and then it's a generational thing that's been passed down.
And I feel like my thoughts of
not just traumas passed down.
Not just trauma. There's lots of good things. And that's the one thing that I also, when I saw it like being popped up, like maybe even in a global level as well, I think my thoughts were also just because that's the thing, that there's like a fine line between what is charity, but then also what encompasses such as a concept as mutual aid, and the alternative things that you can build. And I was also just thinking that I think the one thing that I see missing a lot is that community aspect, and needs to be rooted and built in community, because if not, the cycle will end, because part of this concept is the remembrance and that remembrance of it. And so
and can I just add on something? A lot of the people in the Purhepecha community that we have provided resources have always offered their help after, like, maybe I can't give you guys money because obviously we don't want their money, but they're like, if you ever need help for an event, you need me to come clean, you need me to come paint the church that you guys use.
Someone even offered us some nacatamales.
Like food, or like next event I'm gonna bring you guys something, you know, something to snack on.
We got in a gift of like a canasta de tortillas.
Oh yeah, someone gave me that once, or like bordado de like a servilleta, and like little things that they like to give back. And sometimes like in the Western culture, it's like, no, like you can't take anything because it looks wrong. But ours is like, you have to accept it. Like, you know, those
Yeah.
ladies, like, here's the $20.
Yeah.
Like, take it. Take it. And, like, you have to accept and thank you. Thank you. And then you repay it later on again.
Yeah, so thank you all. I think that was a pretty good conversation that we've had so far. The last thing is that I want to leave thoughts for 2 opening things for you all to touch on. What are your thoughts about this project overall, about you know, this recording and everything? And then the other thing, if we have time and if we have the space, if there's any like last messaging that you would like to say to those that, you know, that have the potential to make changes, whether locally or, you know, in a more broader sense.
I think there's a lot, but one of the main things that I think I would like to say is to really, hopefully, that these structures listen to us and are willing to make the changes so that we are able to get the resources and then are able to distribute them to our community. They just have to make, you know, the certain processes like more open or available for us to learn. And then, like I said, we could do the work. We can, you know, do anything necessary so that our community is able to get the resources, but we just need the pathways to those resources to be more accessible.
Yeah, Olga said it great. Like, this is my only experience with doing any type of like you know, like all the grant process, like the funds coming from a bigger institution. Like prior I had done like, you know, post up my Venmo handle and on Instagram and be like, we need donations, send me them. And then, you know, that's really easy. But something I would say is listen to community. And when people are letting you know that the forms you're using, the applications you're using, the systems you're using are inaccessible, to actually sit on that and ask for community to tell you what will make it more accessible and actually make those changes, because it's so tiring, I bet, for all of you to go to the county, to the state, to the cities and be like, this is what's, you know, a big hurdle for us, and then see it not get changed, and then see that all that feedback you gave them was pretty much for nothing. Yeah.
My thoughts on this project and overall, like, the message I would like to say is, one, I do see the importance of this, because I remember me and my dad were having a conversation. He's like, you know, for a long time it was just me looking kind of like the odd man out in these spaces, and I felt like no one was listening. If the few times, and I remember we were reflecting on communications that were very extractive of, they would come into our community. They one time interviewed youth, Purhepecha youth. I was a child, so they didn't interview me. It was like teenagers at the time. They told us that this opportunity was going to allow for resources, and that we were going to be seen, and that we were going to be made visible to the people in power, etc. Nothing changed. The resources never came. Our community stayed the exact same and really gained nothing outside. And I'm pretty sure that person, you know, did their job, did what they were instructed to do, and, you know, and it left. And I think, as you can see, Purhepecha community has been here for 2 to 3 decades. Like, we're not a community that just recently got here. We're a community that, I think the oldest of my cousins are probably in their early 30s, mid 30s, that were the first couple of generations that were born here in the United States. And I think that is something to be ashamed of, to be honest. And I also think, like Claudia mentioned, I thank those that work within the county that see the importance of our story being told, and that saw that, you know, our application and said that this is a story that needs to be amplified and that needs to be heard. But there is just also something that I think is so important, is just like how my dad says that he felt like he was alone in this, is that there is a new generation of Purhepecha youth, in which includes us, those young people that are ready to join in that advocacy, that we rightfully deserve, because this money that's being allocated towards us rightfully belongs to us as a community that's disproportionately impacted by racist institutions and structures, but in the way that we're also disproportionately impacted by immigration and having mixed status families. There's so many layers to our identity. There's so many layers to the situation that we currently find ourselves in, that a lot of youth are ready to fight against and make sure that money, because we are taxpayers, like regardless of our legal status or not, that money belongs to us and needs to be allocated to these communities, and that we find the way that we can allocate these funds into our community. Because in reality, we didn't know it back then, but that person that came into our community with all these promises and left, they're an outsider. And when these people try to come into our communities and tell our stories through their perspective, they're gonna leave and nothing is gonna be changing. And the thing is, like, about us is that no matter how much we try to leave, or even if it's crossed my mind a couple times to just never look back, we can't, because there is that one, the community relationships that we've built, but also those ancestors that are always going to constantly call us back in order to do that work, in order to complete that work. And so that's my messaging, is that this is only the beginning of what a lot of people are going to see as young people from Indigenous communities, to start doing that work and start letting it known that it's not okay, and that there needs to be language access, there needs to be technology access, there needs to be resources allocated to Indigenous communities. And it is a lie that a lot of these different orgs have the capacity in order to work with Indigenous communities, because we know that is not true, and it has been proven to not be true.
I just want to add on to that is getting these stories from our own perspective and not an outsider's perspective, is community telling community stories. So I think that's very important, because a news reporter could have came and gave us an interview, and we probably would have said yes or no, depending on who it was, and they wouldn't have been able to tell it, or been able to really write out, what our community has gone through, because they have not lived it like we have. I think one of your questions is, like, why is this project important? And I think it's important, hopefully never again, but maybe our children might have to, or our grandchildren might have to go through a pandemic, that they're able to find these records and able to look at them, reflect, and able to do their part, able to support. And even if it's not our kids or children or our family lineage, it's somebody in the community comes back and, like, oh, this is how the Purhepecha community did it back in 2020, 2021. I think it's very important to keep this as a time capsule, to also bring hope to our community if we ever go through a struggle like this again.
Yeah.